Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Excited to have Brian Young from High Impact Flicks and many other channels back today to join me to discuss all the madness, many different things we're going to get into. Brian and I connected many times over the years. I greatly respect his work. He is just, errs on the side of, like to a fault, on the side of what's moral, what's, integrity, constitutionality, like everything that is very important to me. And so ultimately, for how long he's been doing this, he is somebody that I hold in the highest regard in the consistency of those principles. And it's something that I'm constantly talking about today, how frustrating it is in the paradigm, in the two-party illusion, how often people will ignore or completely forego their principles, their integrity, because of the team that they're on. And so Brian's coming on today to discuss that, amongst many other things, Iran, immigration, whatever else we decide to get into. Brian, how are you, brother?
Holy cow, that's quite a humbling introduction. I appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm good, brother. And I mean that wholeheartedly, man. I mean, there's few people out there in this field that I've seen maintain the consistency of their principles, which, it's just being honest, really, like people who just care about what they believe in. It's funny to say that, like that should be something so profound, people to just maintain consistency in what they believe, but it's rare today, and I just feel it's important to shout those things out, man.
And I hate to sound meme-ish, but the meme is true. It's like everything that I needed to know in life, I learned in kindergarten. Like, don't hit people, don't take their stuff, don't threaten people, It's like, that's everything the government does 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, while they tell you not to do the same thing they're doing to you.
Exactly, man. Yeah, and it's just worthy of praise to do that, and people that are out there trying to, I think there's a lot of people coming in new to this field that, it's funny. The analogy that comes to mind is like, kids that grow up watching the Jersey Shore or something like that, who try to emulate that, who feel like that's who they should be like, and it's like dangerous because there's so many manipulating podcasters and, mainstream alternative media out there that are guiding people in the wrong direction, and there's a lot of people out there that I think demonstrate, just principles that we should be guided by, and I think that's important to highlight. But, let's start with kind of that overlap in general around, the two-party illusion. It's something that you and I have talked about quite a lot in the past. And I think that, it's kind of just madness today right now. And I mean, let me just ask you that point blank to start, because to me, it seems crazy. Like, does it feel different to you than it has in the past? Like maybe kind of the inflection point of the last election process, does it feel like it's gotten crazier to you?
It does, but it does for a different reason than somebody might guess. And that is, we have access to so much information right now. I mean, we don't even have to look it up anymore. We can get an app on our phone like Grok or ChatGPT and just with our eyes closed, ask it a question and get all this information. So with all this information that we have and the moral underpinning all of us are supposed to have, and yet we continue to go to the polls year after year, expecting a different result for the same exact activity we've been doing for the last couple decades, is insane to me. That, and what scares me but specifically voting for Donald Trump, and let me just go ahead and put the caveat in there. This goes with Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or Barack Obama, because invariably, if I start talking about Trump, people are like, oh, this is a leftist lunatic libtard, man. Just go and write him off, click off of this broadcast right now. But the thing that scares me is that what happens...
Sorry, go ahead. It's exactly, I had it pulled up from before. It's like, it's exactly what you're talking about right there.
Oh, okay.
Kamala Cuck, because you point something else out,
Yeah, exactly. What happens when somebody far more deceptive than Donald Trump comes along, speaking more right things? Like, let's say they go, you know what we're going to do? If you vote for me, I am going to end the income tax. I am going to abolish the IRS. We're going to institute a sound money system and phase out the Federal Reserve. What if he says all the right things? You know what's going to happen when he gets into the office? He's going to do the exact wrong thing because he's controlled by the real controllers that we don't vote for and weren't elected. So what scares me is when if somebody far more deceptive, far more silver-tongued than a Donald Trump or a Barack Obama comes along and starts issuing all these promises and then gets us even deeper into trouble. I mean, if you're going to still vote for Donald Trump, knowing that in the 1990s, he was literally bailed out by Rothschild's Inc. under Wilbur Ross. 25 years later, Wilbur Ross becomes the Trump-appointed Commerce Secretary. It almost looks like there's no hope.
Yeah, and this is what's so important to recognize, is this is not just some, last week, last year, last 4 years dynamic. It's been going on a long time. And then you overlap that with current, like, this is what's so frustrating to those that have been paying attention this long, or even just before this administration, just the immediate contradiction of what was promised, what's actually happening, despite the cries of all the people that want you to believe that whatever happens today was exactly what was promised. A Stargate platform within the first days, what are the things that stand out to you? Let's put it that way, of things that are contradictory to what was promised in like very bombastic ways.
Well, let me just start with Trump's first term. Like, I would give people I am more apt to give somebody a pass, not really, but more of a pass in 2016, not knowing what Donald Trump's all about. But now with 4 years, a full term already in office, he raised the national debt higher than Obama did in 8 years. He did it in 4. And a lot of people like to talk, well, it was $8.4 trillion. But if you add the $4 trillion Federal Reserve backstop into that, Donald Trump actually raised the national debt, which devalues the currency value, which we all work for, $12.4 trillion in 4 years. Obama can only muster $8.6 trillion in 8 years. So we have the first full term of Donald Trump devaluing the currency, saying, I like take the guns first, due process second, initiating red flag gun confiscation law, was bailed out by the Rothschilds, Inc., Operation Warp Speed, fathered the VAXX. I mean, how can people look you in the eye and actually be serious about, no, Donald Trump is make America first? What you're actually saying is the father of the vaccine is make America first. The guy who oversaw the biggest power and wealth transfer, not just in America, but in the world, is America first. When you demolish and you take an axe to the value of the product of people's time and labor, you are an enemy of the people. You are absolutely not America first. You're, I hate America. So what ticks me off is that people have a history of these people, but they're still voting for the political parasites that aim to put them in change. I like what I say this all the time on my broadcasts. I've got a new channel called The Disturbing Illusion because 4 of my other channels are terminated by YouTube. But I like to quote Daniel Webster, who rightly said, good intentions will always be pleaded for every assumption of authority. Every demand for power is prefaced by, we've got good intentions. We're going to put stuff in place that's going to help America. We're going to lead us to prosperity. And he says, the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be your masters. That's Trump, that's Kamala Harris, that's Joe Biden, but they're just the bankster puppets. The Rothschilds are still in control, no matter who you vote for, Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard you say that before, and I think that's a profound and important thing to think about, because the implication there is, in many cases, people that mean to do bad, but there are plenty that may actually believe what they say and may intend to do something good. But the reality being that the structure, the system is built in a way that never allows that to come to pass, and it's so obvious. But so in your mind right there, you mentioned the bankers, Rothschilds, the different connective points to this history. So what do you think is your implication suggests that there's somebody else in charge, right? Or like pulling the strings. Elucidate that, elaborate on that for me. Like, what do you think the moving parts are? I have my opinions we can get into, but what do you think is, whether Trump or Biden or Obama, what do you think is like the driving force behind this?
Well, I mean, we can springboard off of Amschel Rothschild's quote, famous quote, give me control over a nation's money and I care not who makes its laws. If you're actually in control of the money supply that everybody in your nation works for, what does it matter what a senator or a congressman or a governor or even a president does? You actually control the issuance and value of the currency. And if you've got your hands on that lever of control, you have your hands around everybody's neck and you have your boot on everybody's head. Amschel Rothschilds knew this. The international bankers knew this. That's why in 1913, when they set up the Federal Reserve, and nobody even likes to talk about this anymore. It's like old, outdated, antiquated. Brian, you sound like a broken record, but it's like, yeah, but it's like trying to put out a fire by shooting the water over the top of the flames instead of getting at the base where the fire is actually being stoked. If you don't put an axe at the root of the real problems in this country, you want to get rid of war, get rid of cheap, easy fiat currency, Ponzi scheme credit. The Constitution was supposed to constrain the risks of the bankers through silver and gold being the only sound money. And why is it called sound money? Because you can't create gold and you can't create silver. At least you can't right now. I mean, I know you can create diamonds. You can get these seed initiated fabricated diamonds that look like the real thing and they test like they're the real thing, but you can't create gold and silver. So when you have a money supply that is anchored to and cemented in a sound structure like real gold and real silver, then you can't have wars, you can't have the IRS, you can't enforce income tax laws, because you can only fund those with cheap, easy credit. So the way out is to, and I know we got to like back away slowly because everything is hooked to the fiat currency Ponzi scheme. And if you pull it out, a lot of people will die. Like, what's there, 72 million people on Social Security? They would not do very well if you pulled that out. But we can slowly convert to alternative methods like, cryptocurrency or anything that is of real value. And I know that there's a lot of people against Bitcoin, they're against Ethereum and all that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to push that, but there are alternative means of currency. You can barter, you can move away from the American dollar, you can actually charge and try and jail the international banking cartel. So unless you put the axe at the root of the tree, you're never going to solve the problem. The only way we can have and fund wars is through cheap, easy credit. By the way, a lot of people think this is money. This is currency and it does act as money, but this is, it even says on the front of it, it's a Federal Reserve note. It's literally a note of debt. You are owned by the bankers when you own these things right here. You don't have anything of value. The good thing about it is there's perceived value, so you can actually buy a coffee cup or eggs or gold with it right now until it's eked out of existence.
Yeah, perceived value, right? And we've talked about this in the past, right? That it's really just a representation, and should we stop believing that, it becomes worthless. That's really the fiat dynamic. But so talking about that interesting overlap with the CBDC direction and the stable coin overlap, I'm sure you've seen and probably talked about the Genius Bill and the stable coin overlap that recently passed. If not, it's basically just the bill that kind of sets the table for the stable coin direction. Now, the CBDC direction, all of that being said, it's clear to me that there's a shift happening, and likely because of exactly what you're outlining right there, that the magic of this past system, if you will, like the way that this has influenced people, the control it has over us, our belief in these fiat systems, they're crumbling, and people have seen this for a long time. So this transition into something new, whether it be just that one aspect or like the entire kind of technocratic shift, I think it's very clear why that's happening, and they're trying to transition into something where I would argue, simply put, they just no longer even need our input, right? That's the kind of world they want, because they don't have to rely on asking us for their, or at least our belief in that system. So, what do you think about the shift right now into that, like with things like the Palantir, Patriot Act 2.0, the kind of rationale of the AI government, and all this is happening? Anything jump into your mind about all that?
Yeah, the Palantir thing, that's a whole new thing. But you opened up a good discussion point. As bad as cash is, at least it's not a surveillance coin. Right. You start putting CBDCs online, you will be 100% control. You won't be able to have a yard sale. You won't be able to buy and sell anything. You won't even be able to go anywhere without them tracking all of your progress. We think it's bad enough with these surveillance phones that we have, and make no mistake, it is a surveillance phone. I don't care if you have an Android or an Apple, it is listening to you. It is collecting data on you. It's probably creating an AI generation of yourself, and you're going to be replaced and all that kind of stuff. But you don't want to get rid of cash. You want to be able to keep cash because you want freedom. Everything is out the door with CBDCs. If we accept that right there, and it like you said, it's moving in that direction at a breakneck speed, pretty much all bets are off, and any freedom you thought you have, this ain't the land of the free, home of the brave. It's been the land of the free, home of the slave for a long time. But any freedom that you thought you have is definitely out the window when they implement a digital surveillance coin.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, that's just one part of all of this, right? So like this, I mean, what are your thoughts about that general theory and the idea around, not necessarily like the original definition of what technocracy was, just the leaders, scientists, engineers, and doctors, like that kind of mindset, but what it has become, like from the whole like Technocracy Inc., Elon's grandfather, kind of like to today, this change in, really this kind of merging with like a eugenics mindset, like this kind of like megalomania, kind of like we're going to control the world kind of mindset. What are your thoughts on all that? Do you feel that there's legitimacy to that concern and what the government's currently doing?
Yeah, there's always going to be madmen who are going to try to control us, and then they're going to use puppet politicians to do their bidding and create the policies that make us less free, cost us more money for the benefit of the. I mean, look at what happened in COVID. You had the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks and the Zuckerbergs of the world massively increasing their wealth as our businesses were closed, as our schools were closed, as we were told we can't visit grandma, she's going to have to die alone because we can't afford to, spread this germ, this crazy virus, this COVID 1984 by George Orwell thing. So all these policies and all these enactments by government are just going to, deep in the pockets of the Peter Thiels of the world, the Elon Musks, and all the people who actually pull the strings. And man, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, we know what the solution is. The solution is actually it's found in I quote the founding fathers, but I'm not completely on board with everything the founding fathers thought. A lot of people are like, man, you're always quoting Samuel Adams and Benjamin Franklin. And do you not know that these guys were slave owners? And I'm like, yeah, they had some serious faults. But one thing they had right is we ain't going to bow down under this tyranny as, behind the back door, they kind of set up their own tyranny. But Samuel Adams said, no people will tamely surrender their liberties, nor can any be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. And then he says, on the contrary, when people are universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, in other words, they have no principles, they threw those principles out the window, they will sink under their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. So with the Palantir gang and the Peter Thiel and all these people pulling the puppet strings behind the curtain, I can't bring down that regime, but I can do my best to live a life that's going to cause a crack. And you can live your life that's going to cause a crack in that dam, and somebody else can. And if we get enough cracks in that dam, we can cause the dam to break and we can cause freedom to really spill out. But it's really going to take a massive, colossal effort with a lot of people recognizing, number one, what the problem is, and then what the solution is. And it does come down to money. It comes down to energy. It comes down to money. And if we can institute a sound money with logical constraints, how do we implement that on a grand scale? I'm not sure, but I do know that we need to start.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a really good picture, a vivid kind of outline. It really comes down to the individual actions, like almost not to concern yourself in that moment with the larger, grandiose kind of like, picture the overwhelming idea of what it will take to change that, but just focus on what you can individually do in your life in this moment. And these things do snowball. I
Bingo.
think what's the quote? That it's I forget that. That really it's not.
It's not the majority who will prevail, but the irate
individuals. Like I'll look it up in a second. It's something about ultimately no real change has ever happened. Really, all change that has happened comes down to like one determined individual. It's a quote that I'll put it in the show notes for later. But it's
kind of along the lines of Sam Adams. Also, he said it's not the majority who will prevail, but the irate and tireless minority who are keen on what? Setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And if that's burning in you, and I know it is because I've been watching you for years, freedom and liberty, and just leave me the heck alone. I'm not harming anybody. Is burning in your heart. It's burning in my heart. So if it can burn in yours and my heart, I have great hope that it can burn in somebody else's heart, because everything that we say is in accordance with truth and morality and with standing firm on principle and resisting evil people. We resist evil governments like you and I would resist a Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy trying to move into our community and have their way with the people that we love. That there's no difference between what Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer do than what the government does, except that the government is far worse.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think that's what a lot of people are coming to understand right now. And I actually think that what you're talking about, that burning, the understanding of that, the desire for that change, I actually think is a like a brush fire. It's wildly going quickly through the partisan community right now, which is important. But I want to point back to what you said about the founding fathers. It's an interesting overlapping point, that it's the way I tend to frame that is for two things, really from like the statist mindset, because we've talked about this too, is I think it is a valid point to point out that, if I had a choice, I wouldn't want to live in a world with a government. I wouldn't want to live in a statist society. I would choose to live in an anarchistic society. It's no rulers, not no rules, for people that don't understand that. But what's interesting is we are in this world, and we do live in a world where we're forced to live under the society. And through that, there are guidelines like the Constitution, which can in some ways restrain them. The point is that if we're forced to live in this society, then I do want to engage with that and discuss why it's important within this construct. If I had the choice, I would change that, but we're here. And I think that's a fair point to make, that like a constitution is profoundly important if we are living in this society, which we are. And I think that's fair to point out. But I think the idea being is that we should question the intentions of people all the way back then. As I've said, I do believe that there were intentions that were, good at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But a lot of them had their own problems. A lot of them, it's like today believing that, like, let's just say if you believe that cars are killing the planet, but you have to drive to go to work every day. It doesn't mean you don't still hold that belief, but you still feel like you have to go to work. And I think there's a lot of overlaps to the way they lived their lives then, but they at least saw the direction of something better. But then I also argue that very quickly, it rapidly declined. And I think there were people in that very room that wanted the sort of federal government type world we live in now, but they lost out in the beginning. But I think within so many presidencies, we lost that very quickly. And I think that's where we are today.
And I think it's good. I'm glad you brought up the word statism, because sometimes we need to take a step back and then dust off the rock and then reestablish certain things. So a lot of people, I meet people all the time that have never heard the word statism. They've heard the word government, they've heard the word elected officials, they've heard the word authority, but they've never heard the word statism. So just real quick, for anybody who might be new, who might be watching this, statism is just it's a mental construct. It's the idea that there's a man or a certain group of people who have the right to dominantly rule and control and even rob the rest of us, and we have the obligation to obey their rulership, or in their minds, in the rulers' minds, we're rightly punished. Now, in what moral framework would that ever be true? Mm-hmm. When would it ever be true that your neighbor can come to your house anytime they want and take whatever percentage of your income? Let's say you're a roofer or a construction worker, and you come home, you made $200 today, and they can take 20% of your income without your say, against your will, in a violation of your consent. Well, they can't. Well, then if your neighbor can't do that, if you can't do that to your neighbor, then how is it that somebody called a congressman or a senator or a president or the IRS can do that? It's a fiction. Even Frederick Bastiat said, the state is that great fiction by which everyone seeks to live at the expense of everyone else. Mm-hmm. Well, that's called theft. That's called robbery. It's called extortion. In the arena of sex, if you want to opt out and the person who's engaging in intimate relations with you keeps on going, that's called rape. In the area of life, if you don't want to submit to somebody and they keep on going and putting their hands around your neck, that's called murder. So when somebody violates your consent, it's called a crime. And now we've got a land full of laws. The more laws that we have, the less free we actually are. And there is no greater tyranny than that which is perpetuated under the shield of that law and in the name of justice. So what we got is a whole bunch of laws, which makes us way less free. And the laws serve two purposes. They take away your freedom by punishing you and constraining you and restricting those freedoms. And number two, those laws take more of your money, more of the product of your time and laboring energy. So what people need to understand is, do you really believe that there's a group of people that has a higher claim over your life and property than you? Do you really believe that it's okay sometimes, as long as your government, to initiate unjust force and violence on peaceful people who just want to be left alone? Now, Ryan wants to be left alone. What if I refuse to leave him alone? Well, you would call me a criminal. Then why don't we call governments criminals? Because they write policies all the time, and they get the law enforcement class to knock on your door because you have plant matter, for example, or because you didn't activate your turning signal when they thought you should, or your license plate wasn't properly illuminated. So they come up with all these justifications on how they can interfere with and harass you in your pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness.
And of course, it's because the way that they manipulate people's perceptions on this is they always frame it about the other. It's not, they don't recognize that their government's going to enforce that on them. They want it to be forced on the person they perceive to be, violating the law and so it's like this always waiting for your team to come into power to be able to apply it against the other, without somehow realizing that it could obviously swing back around, and the government's over there going, perfect. We're going to use it against everybody. It's just so constant, but I actually believe that people are seeing that more than ever. Like going back to the original point, I mean, I really do think that this is getting more cartoonish because it's getting more desperate.
What gives you hope that the snowball is springing or rolling in the right direction along those lines?
There's a lot of different points, but really just that I think that it's self-evident to me that there are people sort of like, I mean, even just like the MAGA issue right now around Iran, like you can see that there's these fracturing points where it comes down to, just principled stances, which never used to at least break through the conversation. They were always there. There were always people along the peripheral that were in these teams that were trying to scream and just didn't have enough reach. But I think today the point is that the mainstream alternative media, the corporate media are now giving it airtime because they have to, because they see that it's overtaken the conversation. So they have to air it to water it back down. That's my opinion. But there's a lot of examples like before the selection process I was talking about that, so every year, and you're the same in this mindset where we talk about, maybe don't vote for one of these criminals, or maybe recognize the two-party illusion, or, every election going back as far as I can remember. And I point to James Corbett in this, who was the first person I saw doing this a long time ago, where he, for example, says, vote no one, 2024. It's like, but he used to get ignored. He used to get completely disregarded, like you're not even part of the conversation, except for this last one, where we came out and we started going, hey, maybe none of them are your choice. Maybe it's a binary illusion and you shouldn't vote for anybody. Or maybe just, third party or just other options, right? And the response we got was insane from major people, from Jones and Benny Jones, like this effort to kind of shout down how we were, pure is a purity test, or we were black pilled.
Right. Yeah.
It was wild, right? And that Whitney and Derek and I got together about we decided to start the IMA kind of because of this very clear momentum. And it was about trying to, just get a loose gathering of people, no financial overlap, just that we agree that there's a two-party illusion, that Israel is an obvious thing we're discussing around the genocide, like these foundational obvious points. My point was just to see how very clearly that was attacked before it was meaningless. I just felt like that showed me something shifting and that they were vulnerable, my personal opinion.
So you are seeing, you're actually seeing quantitative responses that are markedly different from what you've seen in prior years.
100%. Yeah. But again, that's my interpretation, my impression. And let's be clear, with the algorithmic AI, Twitter dynamic, for all we know, we're being corralled, and that's not even real. We should consider those things. But
gosh,
very real.
That is another can of worms. I mean, things are getting highly deceptive, but I'm glad you brought it around to Derek Bros and Whitney Webb, because I view those guys and you as these people walking around with daggers, just trying to poke a hole in the darkness so that there can be another slit of light to show people. Because, man, with all the gatekeepers, with all the AI generation, with all the Alex Joneses and Benny Johnsons and Dave Rubins and all these people really muddying the waters of what righteousness really is. And I'm not talking about righteousness in a biblical sense or a religious sense by any means. I'm just talking about being that right person in a dark world. What was it? It's no measure of good mental health to be considered well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. We've got to come to the rational conclusion that we live in a profoundly sick society. People would rather be lied to than be told the truth. People would rather hear fictions than be told what's really going on in the realm of, especially in the realm of politics. But I'm super thankful for people like you and Derek Bros, you and Whitney Webb and James Corbett, and these people out here who are really trying to poke holes in the dark sky so that the stars of truth can shine through. And I mean, that sounds real, I don't know, it sounds fluffy or whatever, but that's vital, man. If we can set those brush fires of freedom in the minds of men, we can make a difference. Maybe not individually, and maybe some of us will have to lose our lives, but I'm telling you, we have got to don the mantle of Patrick Henry. When he said, give me liberty or give me death, that's some serious stuff right there, because we may die, but if I'm going to die, I'm going to die speaking at least something close to the right thing, and I don't see how you can have any more of a moral high ground than don't steal from somebody, don't harm anybody, don't initiate unjust force on people. Nobody owns you, you own yourself. So we have to take the personal responsibility to make this world a better place. Right.
Self-responsibility is a foundational tenet of any representative government, any reality, anything we think that we truly want. Now, I did find this quote, by the way, which is perfect with what you just said. Now, it was Margaret Mead. Regardless, it's funny how people always want to go, oh, but she's X, Y, and Z. It's not about the person. It's about the sentiment of words. It says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I really think that's profound. And it's the idea that, I do believe, obviously you one person out there can't, personally, physically change the world, but your actions, your words can seed things that cause momentum. And that is how this actually goes, and it's like, that's always what changes this, in my opinion. I agree with that.
Yeah, and speaking of the profoundly sick society, along the lines with what you're saying about being that righteous person and then holding to principles and actually changing the world through remaining steadfast. See, like we're all correctable, okay? We all make errors, so we come into the light of truth. But what can be more right than not harming somebody? What can be more right than not threatening somebody? I mean, that's the least you could do for your fellow human being is not threaten them, not harm them. And there's one acid test criterion that we know that's right. All you have to do is ask your own heart. Do I want to live in a life where people are threatening me? Do I want to live a life where people are robbing me or trying to rule over me or jeopardize my life? If you're not insane or a liar, then your answer is no, I don't want to live in that world. Therefore, I'm not going to do the same thing to these other people. This is basic. This is rudimentary, but I'm telling you, because people have gotten away from this springboard, because they've gotten away from the bedrock of morality and principle, which is what we started this whole show with, that's why we have an evil empire called America and Israel going to bomb probably another evil empire, Iran. But we shouldn't be doing that. And if we didn't have the fiat currency Ponzi scheme, we couldn't afford to do it. We couldn't afford to give $3.9 billion a year to Israel. How much money did Biden give to Israel before he left office? Wasn't it like an infusion of $10 to $12 billion? Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's obscene. And then and Trump carried it on through this current. I mean, honestly, it appears as if he will probably exceed what we've ever seen going through this next 4 years. But it's
and you can't do that without the fiat currency Ponzi scheme system wrought by the Zionist international banking cartel known as the Federal Reserve. It would be impossible because you'd have to go to the American people and go, we got to give a big chunk of gold to this country right here. And Americans would go, that chunk of gold costs us a lot of time and American laboring energies. Nope, we ain't going to do it. But the bankers can just skip over that by just printing. They don't even have to print the money anymore. By the way, 80% of all $100 bills are traded internationally, not domestically. I don't know if anybody knew that, but they don't even have to print this anymore. They just put zeros and ones in people's accounts and go, here, done. We're going to give you $12 billion. We're going to give Ukraine $170 billion. It's that easy. But if you had a gold and silver stockpile that was constantly being kept up with audits by the American people, that would not be possible. Do you know the story of Charles de Gaulle in the 1960s and 70s?
Familiar with the name, but go ahead.
Charles de Gaulle was president of France, and back during the Vietnam War, Nixon closed the gold window on August 15th, 1971. The reason he did that, and he said he did it because the international speculators they decoupled gold from the American dollar, and the reason they did that was because after World War II, we signed the Bretton Woods Agreement. Well, during the Bretton Woods Agreement, all the nations decided, because America was the big bully on the block, we're going to give America the world reserve currency status. So during the Bretton Woods Accord, we pegged the dollar to $35 an ounce gold. Well, the 50, that was in 1944. The 50s went along, the 60s went along. We became embroiled with the Vietnam War. We had to fund the war machine, and the only way you could do that was decouple sound money from fiat currency. He closed the gold window in August 15th, 1971, and Charles de Gaulle's like, How are they funding all these bombing campaigns in Vietnam? So he sends his boats across the Atlantic to pick up his gold. All the other nations are like, yeah, we want our gold back too. And Nixon's like, we're closing the gold window. No longer can you trade gold and silver. We're breaking the Bretton Woods promise. So in essence, I think there were 44 countries that we promised we would maintain $35 an ounce gold. We reneged on all of them. We stole all their gold, and we are basically the problem child on the planet's surface. So when you talk about the United States and other countries, you might as well be talking about Nazi Germany, because we obliterate people. We institute regime change. We steal resources. What's that? Go ahead.
No, it's just you and I make that point often. Like they do, the government does not.
Oh yeah, the government. Yeah, the government. Exactly. But when people see the American flag, it's like they're looking with different glasses. Like They Live with Roddy Piper. Right. When he put the glasses on, he could actually see the truth. When people put the glasses on, they see the American flag as like the Nazi swastika or the hammer and sickle from the Soviet Union, because Even Madeleine Albright confessed on air that they killed 500,000 children. That's just children. Can you imagine having that kind of blood on your hand and then just speak about it on live TV like, yeah, but we thought it was worth it. Those are the psychopaths we're dealing with.
I just happened to grab that. Here's right here. So let's check it out.
Yeah, let's do it.
Is the price worth it? This is insane that we have things like this.
Insane.
60 Minutes.
Leslie Stahl, I think, is the name of the...
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Insane.
If that's not a Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, there is no such thing as a Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Think about what she is saying. 500,000, that's just children. And we're not just talking about just from bombing campaigns. A lot of these children died a slow and painful starvation death. They instituted sanctions which kept medical supplies from flowing. Food, they shut off their water. They didn't have electricity. These people were not being just blown up and all of a sudden they weren't here. They had to live for weeks and months and years with racked bones and just no teeth. And it's just what the American military industrial complex that dangles from the string of the Zionist international banking cartel has done is off the charts crazy.
It is. And it's the same thing that these governments have done in Venezuela, the same thing these governments have done in Iran, the same thing these governments have done in Syria, like literally the same sanctions regime. It's insane. And it's constantly like, that's why I scoffed at that picture of this all this time ago. And it's the image of the woman with her baby. And it is exactly what we're seeing right now in Gaza and in many different situations in Lebanon, in Syria. It's so infuriating that this is one of the things that I can't get past today is I'm of the mind that most people, even Republicans who are, blinded by the partisan leadership of the current administration, still see what's going on in Israel and arguably a lot of this. But yet our governments, and I think the world around that's the case, and yet the governments see us, see them, they see that we see what they're doing and they just keep going. How does that not show us that they're not concerned with us, that somebody else is pulling the strings?
They know that we know they're evil and they continue being evil anyway. And back to Gaddafi and Libya and back to Saddam Hussein, the reason we invaded those nations was because of this. Gaddafi was trying to convert his money supply to the gold-based dinar. Well, the American military-industrial complex can't have that, so they invaded. They killed that guy. Same with Saddam Hussein. He was trying to buy his oil in euros. Oh, can't have that. They must have, there must be some weapons there somewhere. We need to go find them. Hey, we have a big bad external existential threat. His name is Saddam Hussein. We need to deploy troops to go get him. Well, what they were trying to do was convert they wanted to get rid of the central banks in those regions. Well, the central banking cartel can't have that. So because they have their hands on the control mechanism of the military industrial complex, they can go institute those policies, those regime change policies, and don't think that's not what it's about in Iran. And this cesspool that we've got going, the melting, what is that called? The flashpoint. The flashpoint of this Iran thing, if the Iranians decide to shut off the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to see some serious stuff going on. China will probably get involved. Russia will probably get involved. We're poking the bear here, literally.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the Strait of Hormuz, and this is one of the points that most people don't seem to bring up, even in like the in the know conversations, like the clear dynamic of the reason one of the reasons they're going after Yemen for all this time to control the other side of the landmass and the Bab el Mandeb Strait, because they're worried that if they choke off the Strait of Hormuz, that they need an alternative route. And all this stuff has been continued for this whole time, and really just the occupation and starvation of Yemen, right? Yep. So if they were to shut off, rather Iran controlling that waterway to shut it down, that would dramatically affect global oil, a lot of different factors. I'm surprised they haven't done it thus far. But what's interesting is, the actions of these governments that are arguably, we're doing this for freedom or to rescue the many people, ultimately come down to just their immediate geopolitical concerns. And that's how blind this all is. They really don't care. That's how little they value human life. That's important.
Well, speaking of the geopolitical agenda, if there was any takeaway from this video we're doing right here, it's this right here. Do not fall for any false flag that will be used as a justification and get us into war. Because I can think of one big thing that somebody could do to get all Americans changed on this war agenda. And that is if Iran or a proxy or even the military itself starts firing on the Fifth Fleet over there in the Gulf of Oman or the Persian Gulf and in the Strait of Hormuz area, that would be the false flag that it would take. Oh, you blew up you sunk some vessels in the Fifth Fleet? Well, we definitely got to go to war with Iran right now. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for any of this stuff. Be decidedly anti-war because, number one, all wars look like they're all banker wars unless you can prove it different to me. They look like they're all banker-funded and operated wars. And number two, they're always going to look for a justification. I don't care if it's the Civil War with Fort Sumter. I don't care if it's 9/11 with the bombing of the Twin Towers, and we got to go in there. They're jeopardizing American freedom and our way of life. We got to go get them. I don't care what the justification is. Do not fall for it because it will be a false flag.
Exactly. Well, here's what's interesting about this. And so this is so interesting. And maybe let's comment maybe on how different this is from maybe a decade ago, or how many people we've all heard the conversation it has become mainstream about the Nimitz and the possibility of this about to be retired old ship being floated. You know, it's interesting, right? But you might let's laugh about this because I'm of the mind that seems to be a head fake. Like I'd be surprised if that is the direction it goes. But James Lee actually got quoted by, I think it was the Wall Street Journal. But so he says, rest assured, the mainstream media wants to let you know that it totally won't be a false flag operation. Here's the actual title. No, the USS Nimitz will not be destroyed in a false flag. That was the actual title of the article.
I did not see that.
I think, isn't that insane? And they actually quote him and his show. But think about making that argument. Like, of course, obviously, it certainly could. Like, obviously, it's possible. But it's just, what are your thoughts on that?
What mainstream outlet was that?
I believe it was Wall Street Journal. Let me see. It was, I added up yesterday. I
Go
think
back.
it was Wall Street Journal. I can say, no, it's the Atlantic, I think. The Atlantic.
No, the USS Nimitz will not be destroyed in a false flag operation?
Isn't that funny?
Wow, my gosh.
Now, like, even right now, though, with that statement, like, even less like let's just say that happened tomorrow. I mean, it seems like a hard thing to sell because even if they're writing an article, that means they know that everyone's talking about that possibility.
Yeah.
You know? But, I mean, let's just for that moment. Do you think that's even likely that'll happen?
Wouldn't it be bizarre if it did? I mean,
almost
super.
Like that makes the point now that it went so far over the top that maybe it could happen.
I kind of hope that because they did put it out there, that won't happen. But even if that doesn't happen, there's going to be something that you. What was it? Do you know that famous quote by Hermann Goering about, the simple people don't want war? It's always the leaders that want the war. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't think so. Doesn't ring a bell.
Let me
do this actually. Go ahead and
Okay.
look at that. I'll pull this clip up since it seems relevant right now of Patrick Lawson and the Washington Institute that I played before. That's exactly what they're talking about, like how they get to war with Iran and false flags that will cause it.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough.
Yes.
And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack.
So that's the most important one, because up until that, you could argue that it was just coincidental and circumstance, and they waited for, now we have a justification. But what he said very explicitly there was that he did the thing that they knew would cause the thing they needed to use. So that's the whole point. The whole every war started by a false flag. He's literally laying that out for us,
Yeah, and specifically with the Fort Sumter thing, that was Captain G.V. Fox. I don't know if you know, but he was supposed to supply Fort Sumter and said he got fired on when they actually did the firing. But think about it. The campaign was so successful in the 1800s, in 1859, 1860, that it got Americans to be willing to fight for their own countrymen. That's how powerful a false flag is.
Right.
And now we're talking about just saying, yeah, go ahead and send the military to a distant land. That would be no problem. But to get somebody to actually put on a military uniform, grab a musket, and point it at your fellow countrymen and be willing to lose your own head over it, if that's not the testimony to the power of propaganda and false flags, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
The Hermann Goering quote, and by the way, Hermann Goering was a right-hand man for Hitler. He said, "Why, of course the people don't want war. Why should some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia nor in England, nor for that matter in Germany. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship, voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. In other words, we can always bring the mind of the people to demand war. That's easy. All you got to do is, number one, tell them they're being attacked, and number two, denounce the pacifists or the peacemakers for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in every country. So we constantly hear about, well, it's an issue of national security. National security is the justification the tyrants use to scare the people to get them on board with endorsing another war.
Right. And I mean, that point right there about, we see that every single time, whether you're an Assad apologist or a whatever it is, like whatever the current thing is, you're simply, or a Kremlin stooge, or, it's just insane how common like that argument is and how far back that goes. And to finish this clip out, it gets even more ridiculous if you guys haven't seen it, where he basically floats the idea of like in a casual joke about how they can get to war with Iran. Don't forget how it started, right? But how we get to war with Iran. Like the point is that's what they're driving toward.
Mm-hmm.
So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war.
They'll laugh in the background.
Yeah.
But I would just like to suggest that one can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that. But I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. It's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
Wow.
I love it when they say the silent part out loud, but even when they do, it still goes over people's heads. Isn't this guy some kind of representative of Israel too?
I forget his overlapping connections. Yeah, I mean, most of these people have their background think tank connections to a lot of different things. I can look it up while we're talking to get the full background. Patrick Clausen is his name. Patrick
Clausen, yeah. So this back to the Iran-Israel thing. It's not really Iran-Israel. It's Iran-America, because Israel is the proxy for America. Everybody knows that. And as far as the October 7th thing, I don't know what you think about the October 7th thing, but let me just say it really looks fishy to me that you have the most secure border wall on planet Earth, of which they boast a rodent couldn't get within 20 feet without knowing exactly where it was, and somehow with duct tape, baling wire, and hang gliders and pickup trucks, they were able to apprehend 12 to 1,400 hostages and kill a whole bunch of people with the most powerful, one of the most powerful militaries in the world, the IDF, looking like they possibly stood down. What do you think about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the evidence is staggering. I mean, I point to someone like Efrat Fangenson, who is Israeli. She's been speaking about this from the beginning, and she was in intelligence in the IDF, and she was instantaneously coming out and going, "There's no way." Like I've been in that position. I worked in that tower. Like that's not possible. Talking about the way the guns are trained to react to a cockroach, and it's just there's so much. Or the time it took to stand down, the amount of foreknowledge that was publicly discussed by Haaretz and other platforms where they were saying, we see this, they're training, and they were told that if they bring it up again, they're going to be put in jail. Like there's just so much. Or the reality of I think it's been whittled down to like 1,134 was the real number, and that most of them were. Most of them were killed by the IDF, which is coming now from Israeli media because of the Hannibal Directive and the many times it was ordered. I mean, these are all verifiable facts. Or even get into the extension of it and how many times they were lying about every single main tenet of the argument, from babies on a clothesline to babies in an oven to, and it's just insane that we just keep going along with this, and then they go on to commit genocide for a year plus. Not even get into the 75 plus of ongoing occupation and genocide. It's just so frustrating that we have to pretend like this is not the most obvious thing in the world. But I think that's why most people in the world do see it. And I think it's just confounding for them. And Zionism is just, flailing right now, where people aren't falling for the same tactics. And in case you are new to the show, that's not to argue about anything other than Zionism as a political organization. Which is not only Jews, or it's about an overlap of all of these. And I think what's important is there are people around the world right now, Orthodox Jewish communities, that are standing up and calling out Zionism. And I think it's important and profound. I mean, this whole thing is falling apart.
Yeah, because if you understand Zionism, it is an ideology that spans people other than the Jews, and it simply says, hey, we are God's chosen people. And I'm not just talking about the Jews. I'm talking about people who adopt the Zionist philosophy. Mm-hmm. And if you're against white supremacy, well, then you would be against that supremacy too, because that's what it is. We're better than you. You are our footstool. We are the kings, and we're going to treat you as such. And if we have to eliminate you in the process, well, that's just going to be what we have to do. And you mentioned the objective, observable facts, from the October 7th event. Mm-hmm. How many of those objective, observable facts actually made their way onto newsprint or on the websites of mainstream media?
Right. Yeah.
If the answer is not many, if any at all, then what you have is remember the Church Committee back in the 1970s? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they revealed that the CIA had successfully infiltrated print and televised media. So that's why I call it the fake stream CIA infiltrated Operation Mockingbird MK Ultra media, because they are literally trying to propagandize you. And then you have the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which said, hey, we're not just going to do propaganda abroad, because formerly it had been illegal for the U.S. interests to initiate propaganda campaigns on American soil. With the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, they're like, oh yeah, we got the green light to propagandize our own people as well. Well, Hitler did that, Stalin did that, Mao did that, and now we're doing that to ourselves, or they're doing it to us. And
it's funny, these topics that at one point were, these things don't get brought up as much as they used to be. And that's important, right? The Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. And I think we both would agree they were already doing that before. This just solidified something that Ron Paul points out and has often pointed out in the past, that there'll be a problem that America's we say that's not okay. And they go, okay, we hear you. And then instead of actually solving the problem, they just solidify it into law. And they go, okay, are we good? It's not illegal anymore. It's like that happens so often. And so in this case, allowing the under, like you said earlier, under the guise of national security, that they could, the way I usually frame it is that news show, the news show you saw last night, the thing could be entirely fake from top to bottom. And all they have to do is argue that it was for national security. That's the reality.
Yeah, and something else we have to understand about our own selves, it's not just understand that we have psychopaths who want to rule us, but we have millions of people around us who are calling for the psychopaths to rule us. So we have inherent in us something that I have to look in the mirror every morning and like, I am easy to manipulate. For me to think that I'm not is to put my head in the sand, because if you look at things like the Asch conformity experiment, we are so easy to manipulate that people we don't even know will go along with if the group outnumbers us. Right. And if you don't know about the Asch conformity experiment, look at it. It's fascinating. But the thing that's even more startling than the Asch conformity experiment is the Milgram experiment on our willingness to just submit to authority, not even because they threatened us, not because they hung anything over our heads, but they merely said, no, this is just what we have to do. So under the auspices of just what we have to do, 65% of the applicants, and if you know anything about it, just look it up. I'm not going to go into detail on it. 65% of just normal, run-of-the-mill Americans, good people normally, would actually inflict pain up to and including pushing the button to deliver a fatal electric shock to somebody simply because an authority figure or what they perceive to be an authority figure told them to do so. And then you combine that with Stockholm syndrome, where we have this natural affinity and affection for our kidnappers and abusers. And you've got a dangerous mix of a whole bunch of people out there wanting people to rule you and I. So I would contend the problem is not the Hitlers and the Stalins and the Mussolinis and the Mao Zedongs or the Pol Pots of this world. The problem is the reason we have 18 million people dying in a gulag, the reason we have 40 million people dying at the hands of Mao Zedong is because a lot of those people voted for Mao Zedong and wanted Stalin and Lenin and Hitler to do what they did. So it is vital. If you're listening to this broadcast right here, you listen to Ryan's stuff or Whitney Webb or Derek Bros or James Corbett, it's vital for you to understand that change has to take place in your own brain and, more importantly, in your own heart. Because if it ain't in there, then we got a really, really rough road ahead of us.
We do, man. And that's a perfect place to wrap this up. That's such a great sentiment. And the idea, like back to what we said before, it is about, whether it truly is the only thing that's necessary for you to make personal choices or not, it's where you have to start regardless. Right. Yeah. You got to start changing within your own life and your immediate actions. And, even from small things that maybe don't have any large effect on the real outcome of political change, but maybe just make other people's lives better or just be kind to other people, which they will then translate to others. It's these choices make a difference in every moment. And I just think it's so profound. I genuinely think because of work like yours and others that people are coming around to this. They're finally starting to see beyond this. But as we've both covered in the past, it's moments like this where they roll out some new QAnon manipulation or Russiagate or whatever it is to get you to fall back into conformity, to get you to rationalize why it's okay to ignore the thing happening and fall back into line. And we have to stand our ground today, So this is why please check out Brian's work and everything else. But you want to list off the other channels you have before we wrap up today? And, High Impact Flicks was the original one, right? And then you should go ahead.
Yeah, those other channels are gone. So what I have right now, I have a police accountability channel called Here's the Deal. And then I have my new political channel, fairly new, it's about a year old now, called The Disturbing Illusion. And on The Disturbing Illusion, we specifically target and call out the left versus right paradigm lie and how dangerous it is and what we can do to resolve the current tyrannical paradigm we live in.
Outstanding. We need more of that. And I'll put those in the show notes. Maybe you guys can all check out his work, and I recommend you give him a follow and continue to check out his work and to promote it. But yeah, man, we need to do this more often, man. Like, it's such a breath of fresh air to talk to somebody who just understand. I'm sure we have different opinions on certain things, but it's the basic idea of understanding how the illusion works. It's just nice to be able to talk to somebody about it.
Yeah, and also I would just exhort your audience, subscribe to Ryan, support him, support Whitney Webb, James Corbett, the Derek Broses of the world, because really they're the unsung heroes. They're the people who should actually be behind the news desks of mainstream media, but you'll never see them there because people don't have an appetite for truth. So I would just end by saying truth is the first casualty in any war, so you got to make it rise to the top. Truth is the new hate speech, and truth is treason in the empire of lies, and he who dares not offend cannot be honest. So I would exhort everybody listening to this, dare to offend by telling the truth.
You're here, brother. Well, thank you, and I'm looking forward to talking again. And as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.